"Marry me, Mrs. Kang," he said, his voice pitched low, but not so low that nearby guests couldn't hear. Vanessa froze. He chuckled at her startled blink. "What a shame you're already married. If you weren't, I would steal you away right now." Laughter rippled through the room. It sounded like a joke. But for Vanessa, it was the first time in 2 years that anyone had seen her. For 2 years she had lived beside her husband like a ghost. A wife Min-jun avoided out of what he called respect. No touch, no jealousy, no acknowledgement, until tonight. As the powerful businessman lifted her hand, kissed her knuckles, and praised her brilliance in front of everyone, something inside Min-jun cracked. Because for the first time, another man wanted what he had ignored. Welcome once again, my amazing viewers. If you're watching right now, kindly tell us where you're watching from. Your support and dedication means a lot to us. Vanessa Thompson. No, Vanessa Kang now, though the name still felt foreign on her tongue after 2 years. Stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The emerald silk of her gown soft against her skin as she shifted her weight, subtle enough that no one watching would notice the exhaustion she carried. "Mrs. Kang." The voice pulled her back. Mr. Choi approached with the kind of confidence that came from old money and older connections, his smile practiced but not unkind. She had met him twice before at similar events, brief exchanges, forgettable pleasantries. Tonight, something was different in his expression. "Mr. Choi." She inclined her head, her posture automatically straightening. "I hope you'll forgive the interruption," he said, his voice carrying just enough to turn nearby heads. In these circles, volume was strategy. "I've been meaning to tell you how impressive your presentation was at the Lee Foundation luncheon last month." Vanessa felt the attention shifting toward them. In a world where wives were often ornamental, intellectual recognition was a currency she hadn't expected to trade. "You're very kind," she replied, her voice steady, "though I think Mrs. Lee deserves credit for that." Grace in praise and deflection in credit. Choi's smile widened. "Your husband is a fortunate man, Mrs. Kang. You look beautiful tonight. Beauty and intelligence so perfectly balanced. It's rare in any circle, regardless of culture." The compliment hung in the air, respectful but pointed. Vanessa recognized it for what it was. Acknowledgement not just of her appearance, but of her presence, her mind, the careful way she had learned to handle rooms that weren't built for someone like her. She had worked for this respect, had earned it through 2 years of studying Korean customs with the same intensity she'd once applied to her master's thesis, through learning when to speak and when to let silence communicate for her. "Thank you, Mr. Choi. That's very generous." She didn't blush, didn't simper. She simply accepted the words with the same poise she brought to everything else. Choi reached for her hand then, and Vanessa allowed it, a gesture that could be interpreted as old-fashioned courtesy in these circles. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the touch lingering a fraction too long. When he raised his eyes to hers, there was something playful and dangerous in his expression. "Marry me, Mrs. Kang," he said, his voice pitched low but not so low that nearby guests couldn't hear. Vanessa froze. He chuckled at her startled blink. "What a shame you're already married. If you weren't, I would steal you away right now." He laughed loudly. A ripple of laughter moved through the surrounding guests, shocked, delighted, scandalized. It was the kind of audacious comment that could be dismissed as a joke, as harmless flirtation among the wealthy and bold. But Vanessa saw the way Mrs. Park's fan stilled mid-flutter, the way young Lee Ji-hoon's expression darkened with something like envy. Vanessa extracted her hand with practiced grace, her smile never wavering. "You flatter me, Mr. Choi, but I'm afraid you're much too late." More laughter. Across the room, Min-jun Kang stood with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. He had been watching the interaction unfold with the same detached interest he brought to most social exchanges, right up until the moment Choi lifted Vanessa's hand to his lips. Then something shifted. Min-jun watched the kiss, watched Choi's mouth press against his wife's skin, watched the man smile like he had every right to touch her, to make his joke that wasn't entirely a joke in front of half of Seoul's elite, watched strangers nod in agreement with Choi's assessment, Watched the way Mrs. Park whispered behind her hand to her daughter. Watched young Lee Ji-hoon's gaze linger on Vanessa with newfound interest, with the kind of speculation that came from seeing another man stake a claim, however playfully. The room was seeing her, truly seeing her, and Min Jun felt something sharp and unfamiliar lodge itself between his ribs. It wasn't anger. He knew anger intimately, had wielded it like a blade in his work. This was something more insidious, something that made his jaw tighten and his fingers flex around the glass until he heard the crystal threaten to crack. He didn't like the way Choi stood too close, didn't like the proprietary tone in the man's voice when he said, "If you weren't already married," as if the marriage was a technicality, a regrettable obstacle. Didn't like that he suddenly felt possessive over something he had spent 2 years keeping at a carefully maintained distance. He moved before he could think better of it. The crowd parted for him the way it always did, respect and fear creating a path. Vanessa's eyes found his as he approached, and for a fraction of a second, he saw surprise flicker across her face before the mask of composure returned. She had never seen him move, with such purpose toward her. Not in 2 years. "Mr. Choi," Min Jun said smoothly, arriving at Vanessa's side. His voice was pleasant, controlled, but there was steel beneath the silk. "I hope you're enjoying the evening." "Very much, Kang-si. I was just telling your wife." "Yes, I heard." Min Jun's hand settled on the small of Vanessa's back, his palm warm against the silk, his fingers splayed with unmistakable intention. He felt her spine straighten beneath his touch, felt the slight catch in her breathing. "My wife has a remarkable ability to make even the most complex ideas accessible. It's one of the many things I admire about her." The claim was clear. The touch, their first real physical contact in 2 years beyond obligatory handshakes at public events, was deliberate, possessive, unmistakable. Min Jun watched Choi's smile tighten at the edges, watched understanding dawn in the older man's eyes. "Indeed," Choi said carefully, his earlier boldness evaporating under Min Jun's dark gaze. "You're a fortunate man." "I'm aware." Min Jun's fingers pressed slightly more firmly against Vanessa's back. "And Mr. Choi? My wife is already married. She doesn't need any more proposals, joking or otherwise." The words were quiet, almost friendly. But everyone within earshot heard the warning beneath them. This wasn't a man who shared. This wasn't a man who found such jokes amusing. The conversation dissolved into pleasantries that meant nothing, and eventually Choi retreated, his exit less graceful than his entrance. But Min Jun's hand remained on Vanessa's back for another breath, 2, 3, before he withdrew it like he'd been burned. He didn't look at her when he said, "We should go." The walk to the car was silent. Min Jun's driver waited by the black sedan, opening the door without a word. Inside the vehicle, the leather seats and tinted windows created a cocoon of privacy, but neither of them spoke. Min Jun stared out the window, his jaw working, trying to name the feeling that had sent him across that ballroom floor. Jealousy. The word arrived unwelcome and undeniable. He was jealous. After 2 years of careful distance, of treating his wife like a guest in his home, of believing that restraint was kindness, he was jealous that someone else had noticed her brilliance. Jealous that Choi had touched her hand, had kissed it, had made his audacious comment while Min Jun stood across the room like a stranger. Jealous that Choi had made her smile, even politely. Jealous that the room had looked at her the way Min Jun had forbidden himself from looking. And underneath the jealousy was something worse, the knowledge that he had no right to it. He had ignored her for 2 years, had given her space and distance and careful, respectful indifference, had treated their marriage like a business arrangement that required nothing more than his name and his protection. What right did he have to be angry that another man had noticed what he'd been too much of a coward to acknowledge? Beside him, Vanessa sat with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on nothing. She could feel the tension radiating from him, sharp and strange, and utterly unlike the man who had spent 2 years being so determinedly absent from her life that they lived like ghosts in the same house. She could still feel the ghost of his hand on her back, the possessive weight of his palm, the way his fingers had pressed against her spine like he was staking a claim. The silence between them felt different than the comfortable distance they had maintained. This silence had weight, had edges, had the quality of something that would eventually need to be named. The house was too quiet when they arrived home. Vanessa had noticed this about the Kang residence from the first night she'd arrived with her suitcases and her grief, how silence seemed to be its natural state. Even now, at nearly midnight, the only noise was the deliberate click of Min-jun's shoes against marble as he moved through the foyer with purposeful aimlessness. She stood in the archway between the entrance hall and the living room, still wearing her emerald gown, watching her husband perform an elaborate dance of avoidance. He shrugged off his coat with more attention than the task required, draping it over the back of a chair rather than hanging it properly. His fingers worked at his cufflinks with the focused intensity of a man defusing a bomb. Vanessa knew this. She had learned it over 2 years of living with someone who occupied space like he was apologizing for his own existence within it. Min-jun was a ghost who paid the bills, a shadow that left coffee brewing in the morning before she woke, a name on documents that gave her legitimacy in a country that still felt foreign despite her efforts. But tonight, something was different. The avoidance felt aggressive rather than habitual, pointed rather than polite. He moved to the bar cart and poured whiskey with hands that were steady but deliberate. She watched the amber liquid catch the light, watched him lift the glass to his lips without drinking, watched him set it down and reach for a stack of papers on the side table that he'd already organized that morning. Did something happen tonight? Her voice fractured the silence like dropped glass. Min-jun's shoulders tensed, a minute tightening that most people wouldn't notice. But Vanessa had become an expert in reading the things he didn't say, the emotions he filed away in whatever locked drawer he kept inside himself. Nothing happened. His tone was clipped, efficient. He didn't look at her. The evening went, well. You seem... She searched for a word that wouldn't sound accusatory. Unsettled. I'm fine. 2 words. A wall built in syllables. Vanessa felt something twist in her chest, familiar and bitter and tired. She had spent 2 years trying to be small enough, quiet enough, perfect enough to not be a burden to this man who had married her out of obligation. She had memorized his preferences, learned his schedules, stayed out of his way. And still, somehow, she had failed tonight. I'm sorry, she said quietly, her fingers finding the clasp of her necklace, needing something to do with her hands. If I embarrassed you somehow at the event, I didn't mean you didn't embarrass me. The words came out sharper than he intended. Min-jun finally turned to face her, and Vanessa saw something unfamiliar flash across his features before he controlled it. Why would you think that? You've barely looked at me since we left. She gestured at the papers he was holding, the untouched whiskey, the coat draped haphazardly. You're hiding. The accuracy of her observation seemed to strike him. His jaw worked, tension rippling beneath the surface of his carefully constructed composure. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge she'd never heard directed at her before. Choi was overly familiar. Vanessa blinked, recalibrating. I'm sorry? Mr. Choi. Min-jun set the papers down with precise care, like he was restraining himself from crumpling them. He's known for being forward with women. Inappropriate. The words hung in the air between them, and suddenly, Vanessa understood. The hand on her back. The possessive edge to his voice when he'd called her my wife. The tension radiating from him during the silent car ride home. This wasn't about her embarrassing him. This was about Mr. Choi. This was about jealousy. The realization should have felt like victory, proof that her husband saw her as more than an obligation. Instead, it felt like standing on unstable ground, like the rules of their careful distance had shifted without warning. He was only being polite, Vanessa said carefully, keeping her voice neutral. The compliment was respectful, professional even. I didn't encourage the hand kiss or even the... I know. Min-jun cut her off, his hand rising to loosen his tie with more force than necessary. I know you didn't. That's not... He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words in a way she'd never witnessed. Min-jun was always controlled, always measured. Watching him fumble for language was like watching a master pianist forget a chord. Then what is it? She took a step closer, her heels clicking softly against marble. Help me understand, Minjun. You've spent 2 years keeping every possible distance between us. You leave rooms when I enter them. You eat breakfast an hour before I wake up. You've perfected the art of living with someone while never actually seeing them. And tonight, because Mr. Choi, I didn't like the way he looked at you. The admission came out low, almost reluctant, like he was confessing to a crime. Minjun's eyes finally met hers, and Vanessa saw something raw there, something unguarded that made her breath catch. It wasn't appropriate, he continued, his voice rough, around the edges. The way he stood too close, the way he kissed your hand, the way he spoke about your intelligence, your appearance, like he had the right to inventory your qualities in front of a room full of people, including his joke about marrying you. His fingers flexed at his sides. I didn't like it. Vanessa stood very still, afraid that movement might shatter whatever fragile honesty had emerged. This was more than Minjun had revealed about his feelings in their entire marriage, more than she'd ever expected him capable of revealing. I'll be more careful, she said softly, trying to navigate this unfamiliar territory. In public. I didn't realize that my interactions with your business associates might reflect poorly on... That's not what I'm saying. Frustration leaked into his tone. He turned away from her, his hand dragging through his hair and disrupting the careful styling. You didn't do anything wrong, Vanessa. This isn't about you needing to be more careful or more conscious of appearances. This is... He stopped. The unfinished sentence expanded in the space between them, heavy with everything he couldn't or wouldn't articulate. This is what, she pressed gently. But Minjun just shook his head, his walls reconstructing themselves in real time. She could almost see it happening, the way his shoulders squared, the way his expression smoothed into neutrality, the way he reached for the persona of the controlled, distant husband she had married. Nothing. Forget it. He picked up his whiskey glass, finally drinking from it. It's late. You should get some rest. A dismissal. Polite and absolute. Vanessa felt the familiar ache of being shut out, but this time it was sharper, because she'd glimpsed what lay behind the walls. She had seen him jealous, uncertain, vulnerable, and now he was storing it all away again, locking the door, handing her the same courteous distance he'd been offering for 24 months. Okay, she said quietly. She turned toward the stairs, her gown flowing against her legs. At the base of the staircase she paused and looked back at him. Minjun. He met her eyes, guarded but listening. I didn't mind that you touched me tonight. At the party. Her voice was soft, careful, offering him something she wasn't sure he wanted. Your hand on my back. I didn't mind it. She didn't wait for a response. She climbed the stairs to her separate bedroom in this too-large house, leaving him alone with his whiskey and his papers and the jealousy he didn't know how to name. Behind her, Minjun stood motionless in the silent living room, her words echoing in the spaces between his carefully constructed defenses. He looked down at his hand, the same hand that had touched the small of her back with such deliberate possession. Vanessa had just unclasped her second earring when she heard it, a soft, hesitant knock on her bedroom door. She froze, the pearl earring suspended between her fingers. In 2 years of marriage, Minjun had never knocked on her door. He had never approached this wing of the house after 10 o'clock. He had never sought her out for anything that wasn't logistics. A family dinner they needed to attend, documents requiring her signature, schedules that needed coordinating. The knock came again, slightly firmer this time, as if he'd gathered courage between the first attempt and the second. Vanessa set the earring on her vanity with trembling fingers and crossed to the door, her mind cycling through emergencies. His mother. A business crisis. Something wrong with the house. She pulled open the door, expecting disaster, and found only Minjun, still in his dress shirt and slacks from the party, his tie removed, his sleeves rolled to his elbows in a rare moment of casual disarray. Is everything okay? The question came out more worried than she intended. Did something happen? No, everything's... He stopped, seemed to reconsider. Can I come? In. The request was so unexpected that Vanessa stepped back automatically, granting him entrance to a space he'd never occupied. She watched him cross the threshold with visible uncertainty, his eyes scanning the room like he was cataloging evidence of who she was. The books stacked on her nightstand, mostly Korean language guides and contemporary fiction. The photographs on her dresser, her parents, her friend who'd promised to visit and never had. The journal lying open on her desk, her handwriting sprawling across the pages in English, the language she still thought in despite speaking Korean all day. Would you like to sit? She gestured to the small seating area by the window, 2 chairs she'd arranged hopefully when she first moved in, imagining conversations that had never materialized. Min-jun sat, but his posture remained formal, uncomfortable. Vanessa took the chair opposite him, acutely aware that she was still wearing her gown, that her makeup was half removed, that this felt more intimate than anything they'd shared in their entire marriage. "The party went well," he said finally, his voice taking on the careful neutrality of a business meeting. "My mother will be pleased." The Lees seemed impressed with the foundation's work. Vanessa nodded, recognizing the script. Safe topics, neutral ground, the same territory they'd been navigating for 24 months. Mrs. Lee mentioned wanting to collaborate on the youth education initiative. That would be beneficial for both organizations. Yes. Silence expanded between them, awkward and weighted. Vanessa folded her hands in her lap, waiting. Min-jun had come here for a reason, had violated 2 years of careful boundaries to knock on her door past midnight. This wasn't about the party, or the Lees, or his mother's approval. "Do you resent me?" The question arrived without preamble, stark and vulnerable. Vanessa's head snapped up, her eyes finding his. Min-jun was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before, something raw and uncertain and deeply afraid of her answer. "What?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "For the marriage, for..." He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything. "For all of this. Do you resent me for it?" Vanessa felt something crack open in her chest. Of all the questions she'd imagined him asking, this had never made the list. "Min-jun, why would you think that? You were grieving the loss of the life you loved." His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the strain beneath it. "When we married, you'd lost the life you loved. Your family pushed you into this arrangement when you were vulnerable, and I went along with it because..." He stopped, his jaw working. "Because my family wanted it. Because it made sense on paper. But you never wanted this. You never wanted me." "That's not..." Vanessa's throat tightened. She felt tears threatening and forced them back. "I was grieving, yes, I was a mess. I barely remember the wedding because I was so hollowed out inside. But I never blamed you for that. I never resented you. You barely looked at me for the first 6 months. Because I thought you didn't want me to." The words burst out of her sharper than she intended. "You were so careful to stay away, so determined to give me space. I thought you were repulsed by me, by my grief, by my inadequacy, by the fact that I wasn't Korean enough or polished enough or whatever enough to be the wife you actually wanted." Min-jun stared at her like she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. "That's not..." "Vanessa, I kept my distance because I thought that's what you needed. You'd been forced into marriage with a stranger during the worst time of your life. I thought the least I could do was not make demands on you, not burden you with expectations, not trap you any more than you already were. So you disappeared." Her voice broke on the word. "You became a ghost in your own house. You made yourself so small and absent that I started to think I'd imagined having a husband at all. I thought I was doing the right thing." His voice cracked on the admission, and Vanessa watched his careful control fracture. "I thought I was being kind, respectful. I thought if I stayed away, you could build a life here without feeling suffocated by obligation to someone you didn't choose. And I thought you hated being married to me," Vanessa said softly. "That you regretted it every day. That you couldn't stand to be in the same room as me for longer than absolutely necessary." The misunderstanding sat between them, massive and devastating. Min-jun leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. "Tonight, when Choi was praising you, when everyone was looking at you like they were seeing you for the first time." He paused, struggling with the words. "It made me realize that I've been seeing you the whole time, that I've been aware of you every single day. The way you take your coffee, the way you speak Korean with that slight Chicago accent, the way you read in the garden when you think no one's watching. And I realized that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about duty or obligation or doing the right thing. Vanessa's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying I was jealous tonight. He looked up at her, his dark eyes intense and unguarded. Not because Choi damaged my reputation or crossed some professional boundary. I was jealous because he got to tell you that you're brilliant and beautiful and remarkable, and I've been standing in the shadows for 2 years, pretending I haven't noticed the same things. I was jealous because he got to make you smile, and I've spent 2 years believing I didn't have the right to try. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and honest and terrifying. Vanessa felt tears slip down her cheeks. She couldn't have stopped them if she'd tried. I don't want to be that distant anymore, Minjun continued, his voice rough with emotion. I don't want to be the husband who avoids you, who treats you like an obligation or a burden. He stopped, took a breath. I want to start over, not with the marriage necessarily, but with us. I want to talk to you. Walk beside you instead of ahead of you. Learn who you are now, not who I assumed you were 2 years ago. What does that mean? Vanessa asked, needing clarity, needing to understand what he was offering. I don't know exactly, he admitted. But maybe it starts with conversations like this, with honesty instead of assumption, with trying instead of avoiding. He met her eyes. If that's something you'd want. I understand if it's too late. If the damage is, it's not too late. The words came out fierce and certain. Vanessa wiped at her tears, frustrated by the vulnerability but refusing to hide it. I've been alone in this marriage for 2 years, Minjun. I've been living with a stranger who pays the bills and signs the documents and maintains perfect distance. And yes, there were days I resented it, days I felt so lonely I couldn't breathe. But if you're saying you want to actually try, to actually see me, to actually be present, then no, it's not too late. Something shifted in his expression, relief, mixed with hope, mixed with fear. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be close to someone. Neither do I anymore, Vanessa said honestly. I barely remember who I was before grief. I don't know if I'm good at this either. Maybe we figure it out together. She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. Minjun stood, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he simply looked at her with an expression so open and vulnerable that it felt more intimate than any touch could have been. Good night, Vanessa. Good night. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Thank you. For being honest tonight, for not giving up on the possibility of us. Then he was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Vanessa woke to sunlight streaming through sheer curtains and the immediate visceral memory of Minjun standing in her doorway, his voice cracking around the words, I don't want to be that distant anymore. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation like a song she couldn't get out of her head, the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he'd admitted to jealousy like it was a confession, the impossible hope that had taken root in her chest and refused to be dislodged. Her phone said 6:47 a.m. Normally she'd roll over, wait until she heard the front door close behind him, his departure, the signal that it was safe to move through the house without the awkwardness of accidental encounter. But today, something pulled her out of bed. Curiosity, maybe, or the terrifying possibility that last night had been real. She dressed carefully, not for an event, just for breakfast, in white linen pants and a soft blue sweater. She tied her hair back loosely, applied minimal makeup. When she caught herself checking her reflection a third time, she forced herself to walk away from the mirror. The house felt different as she descended the stairs. The silence was still there, that quality of quietness that came from too much space and too few words. But it had changed texture. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. She found Minjun in the breakfast room, standing by the windows with a cup of coffee, his back to the doorway. He was already dressed for work in charcoal trousers and a white shirt and coat. The morning light caught the angles of his face, as he turned at the sound of her footsteps. They both froze. 2 years of avoidance had trained them to move around each other like dancers who'd memorized completely separate routines. But now, standing in the same room at the same time, neither of them knew the steps. "Good morning." Min Jun spoke first, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, not the crisp, efficient tone of obligation, something gentler. "Vanessa." The sound of her name in his mouth made something flutter in her chest. "Good morning." She moved into the room, hyper-aware of every movement. "You're still here?" Yes." He seemed almost uncertain. "I thought we could have breakfast together, if you're comfortable with that." If you're comfortable. Not an assumption, not an order, a question that acknowledged she had the right to say no. "I'd like that," Vanessa said, and felt a smile tug at her lips before she could stop it. She watched his shoulders relax. They moved toward the table with the awkwardness of strangers during a first date. Mrs. Cho, their housekeeper, appeared with her usual timing, setting down plates of rice, grilled fish, banchan, and fresh fruit, a spread meant for two people who might actually eat together. Vanessa wondered if Mrs. Cho had somehow sensed the shift, or if this was always how breakfast looked and she'd simply never been present to see it. Min Jun held out a chair for her, such a small gesture, but Vanessa felt its weight, the intentionality behind it, the way it acknowledged her presence. "Thank you." They sat across from each other, the table suddenly feeling both too wide and not wide enough. Vanessa reached for the tea, her hands needing something to do. Min Jun did the same with his coffee. For a moment, they simply ate breakfast. "Did you sleep well?" he asked it quietly, and when Vanessa looked up, she found him watching her with genuine concern rather than polite obligation. Honesty, that's what they'd promised each other last night. "Not really," she admitted. "I kept replaying our conversation, thinking about everything we said." "Me too." He set down his cup. "I'm not sure I slept at all." "I keep wondering what it looks like," Vanessa said carefully. "Starting over. I don't know what that means in practice." "Neither do I." Min Jun leaned back slightly, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "But maybe it starts with this. Breakfast together, conversation. Not because we have to coordinate schedules, but because we want to." "Do you?" "Want to, I mean." His eyes met hers fully, and Vanessa felt the impact of his gaze in a way she never had before. "Yes, very much." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They ate slowly, the silence between them no longer empty but full of awareness. Vanessa found herself noticing details she'd trained herself to ignore. The way Min Jun's hair fell across his forehead when he looked down at his plate, the elegant economy of his movements, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he was as nervous as she was. "There's a charity luncheon on Saturday," Min Jun said after a while. "The Kim Foundation. We were invited months ago, but I understand if you'd rather not, I'll go." Vanessa interrupted, then caught herself. "Unless you'd prefer to go alone." "No." The word came quickly. "I'd like you there, but..." He paused, choosing his words. "If at any point you want to leave, if it's too much or you're tired or you just need to, we'll leave. No questions asked. Your comfort matters more than appearances." Vanessa stared at him. "You've never said anything like that before." "I should have." His expression held regret. "I should have asked what you wanted instead of assuming you'd endure whatever was required. I thought endurance was what you wanted from me. I wanted you to feel free." Min Jun's voice dropped lower. "I realize now that what I gave you wasn't freedom. It was isolation dressed up as respect." The sentence landed between them, painful and true. Vanessa felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "We both got it wrong, didn't we? You were trying to give me space and I was trying to be invisible, and somehow we both ended up completely alone." "Yes." He met her eyes. "But we don't have to keep getting it wrong," she nodded, allowing herself to believe him. They finished breakfast in a different kind of silence, not empty, not awkward, but tentative and new. When Min Jun stood to clear his plate, Vanessa watched him pause, then deliberately slow his movements. He'd always rushed through meals before. Now he was lingering, extending the moment. I should head to the office, he said finally, but made no move toward the door. What time will you be back? The question felt bold in a way she'd never allowed herself before. 7, usually. But I could. He stopped himself. Would you want to have dinner together? I could be home earlier, 6:30. The offer felt monumental. I'd like that. Something shifted in his expression, relief maybe, or cautious joy. Then I'll be home at 6:30. They walked to the foyer together, and Vanessa noticed that he matched her pace instead of striding ahead. He always wasn't pulling her along in his wake anymore. He was walking beside her, shoulder to shoulder, adjusting his long strides to match hers. It was such a small change. It meant everything. At the door, Min-jun reached for his briefcase. He turned to her one more time. I'll be at the main office until 3, then I have a meeting in Gangnam. After that, I'll head home. He said it matter-of-factly, but Vanessa understood what he was really offering, his location, his schedule, his availability. If you need anything, or even if you just want to talk, you can find me. You can always find me now. The words settled over her. Not I'll give you peace, not I'll stay out of your way, but I'm here. I'm present. You matter enough for me to be found. Okay, she whispered. He held her gaze for a long moment, and Vanessa felt the pull of attraction she'd been suppressing for 2 years. It had always been there, buried beneath grief and assumption and self-protection. But now, with honesty, between them, with the possibility of something real, the awareness was undeniable. She saw the recognition in his eyes, knew he felt it too, but neither of them moved to close the distance. It was too soon. They were learning to exist in the same space first. Everything else could wait. Have a good day, Vanessa. You too. He left, and she watched through the window as his car pulled away. Only when it disappeared did she realize she was smiling, a real smile. 2 weeks after the night Min-jun knocked on her door, Vanessa found herself in the library at 8:30 on a Tuesday evening, curled into the leather armchair by the window with a novel she'd read twice before. She was so absorbed in a passage she'd underlined in previous readings that she didn't hear Min-jun enter until he spoke. Is it good? She looked up, startled. He stood in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes, his tie loosened, holding what looked like a contract in one hand and reading, glasses in the other. I've read it before, she admitted. Twice, actually. Why read it again if you know what happens? He moved into the room, not hovering but not leaving either, a new pattern they'd established. Because knowing the ending makes the beginning less frightening, Vanessa said, then wondered if she'd revealed too much. But Min-jun just nodded, like her answer made perfect sense, and settled into the chair across from her with his documents. They read in comfortable silence for the next hour, the only sounds the turning of pages and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. Vanessa found herself reading the same paragraph 3 times, too aware of him, the way his brow furrowed when he concentrated, the unconscious gesture of pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose, the elegance of his hands as he made notes in the margins. Do you miss Chicago? The question came suddenly, and Vanessa realized he'd been watching her. Sometimes, she said, honestly. They'd made a pact of honesty that night in her room, and she was learning not to default to the answers she thought he wanted to hear. I miss knowing how things work, understanding all the unspoken rules, being able to order coffee without mentally translating first. Do you regret coming here? It was a heavier question than the first, weighted with everything he'd asked that night. Do you resent me? I regretted being numb, Vanessa said carefully. I regretted going through the motions of a life I couldn't feel. But coming here, marrying you? She met his eyes. I'm not sure I knew enough about what I was choosing to regret it. I was just surviving. And now? Now I'm starting to actually live here. To see Seoul as a place I inhabit, not just a place I'm passing through. She paused. You've helped with that, these past few weeks. Something softened in his expression, gratitude mixed with relief. Tell me about Chicago, the parts you loved. So she did. She told him about Lake Michigan in summer, about deep dish pizza that was really a casserole, about her graduate program and the coffee shop where she'd written most of her thesis. She told him about her friend Maya who'd promised to visit and never had, about her mother's garden, about feeling like she understood her place in the world. Minjun listened with the focused intensity she was learning was a part of him. When he gave his attention, he gave it completely. He asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually hearing her. "What about you?" Vanessa asked when she'd finished her stories. "Did you always want this life?" "This life?" He glanced around the library at the house that symbolized wealth and obligation in equal measure. The business, the expectations, being the person everyone needs you to be. Minjun was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted to make my father proud. That was the beginning. Everything else just accumulated around that desire until I forgot there might be alternatives." "Do you ever wish you'd chosen differently?" "Every day," he admitted. "But wishing doesn't change reality. And there are parts of this life I wouldn't trade." His eyes found hers. "Recent parts." The sentence hung between them. You, he meant you, and Vanessa felt warmth spread through her chest. These conversations became their new routine. Mornings over breakfast, evenings in shared spaces, quiet moments where they traded pieces of themselves. Vanessa learned that Min Jun had wanted to be an architect before family obligation redirected him toward business, that he spoke to his younger sister every Sunday without fail, that he carried tension in his shoulders like armor and rarely allowed himself to relax fully. Min Jun learned that Vanessa hummed unconsciously when she was content, usually old jazz standards her father had loved, that she reread books the way some people revisited childhood homes, that she took her tea with honey instead of sugar, preferred Earl Grey in the morning and chamomile at night, and always wrapped both hands around the cup like she was holding something precious. He started leaving a cup of Earl Grey on the breakfast table before she came downstairs. She started placing his reading glasses on the table beside his preferred chair in the library. Neither of them mentioned these small acts of care, but both noticed them, collected them, held them close. The fourth week brought another mandatory social function, a fundraiser for the Hanjin Foundation. Vanessa dressed carefully, choosing a deep burgundy gown that made her feel elegant rather than performative. When she came out from her room, she found Min Jun waiting in the foyer, and the way his eyes moved over her made her breath catch. "You look beautiful." He said it simply, factually, like he was commenting on an undeniable truth. "Thank you." She smoothed her hands over the silk, nervous. "I wasn't sure about the color." "It's perfect." In the car, he asked, "Are you comfortable going tonight? We can leave whenever you want." "I'm okay," she met it. "It's easier now, when you're actually there." At the event, Min Jun stayed close, not hovering, not possessive, but present in a way he hadn't been at the party where Mr. Choi had sparked his jealousy. When colleagues approached, he introduced her with quiet pride. "My wife, Vanessa." And the way he said it felt like a claim that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with choosing her, seeing her, valuing her. Mrs. Yu, a board member Vanessa had met several times, cornered her near the champagne table. "I must say, Mrs. Kang, you seem different lately. More settled." "Do I?" Vanessa glanced across the room to where Min Jun stood talking with investors, but his attention kept drifting back to her. "Yes. And your husband, he's different too. He actually looks at you now." Mrs. Yu smiled knowingly. "It's lovely to see." "Some marriages start with passion and cool into partnership. Yours seems to be doing the opposite." The conversation stayed with Vanessa through the rest of the evening. A marriage moving backward into love. Later, as they moved through the crowd, Min Jun's hand found the small of her back, the same gesture he'd used at the party with Choi, but now it felt different. Not possessive or reactive, but protective. A reminder that she wasn't alone. When they stopped to admire the silent auction display, their hands brushed. Once, twice. Neither pulled away. Vanessa felt electricity through the point of contact, just their knuckles touching, nothing more, but it was enough to make her aware of his proximity, his warmth, the barely there connection that somehow felt very intimate. Min Jun's pinky finger hooked around hers, so subtle that anyone watching wouldn't notice. But Vanessa felt it like a shout. She glanced up at him and found him already looking at her, his expression open and wanting and careful, all at once. "Is this okay?" he asked quietly, and she understood he was asking about more than just touching hands. "Yes," she whispered. They stood like that for a long moment, pinky fingers intertwined, the rest of the party fading into background noise. When they finally separated, Min Jun's hand lingered at her back for just a second longer than necessary. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word sounded different now. Not a house they both occupied while maintaining separate lives, but a place they were building together through conversations. "Yes," Vanessa said, and meant it completely. In the car, Min Jun reached across the space between them and took her hand properly this time. Fingers laced, palm to palm, thumb tracing small circles against her skin. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The evening had unfolded with an ease that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. They'd shared dinner at the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room. Vanessa's suggestion, Min Jun's enthusiastic agreement. They'd laughed over his failed attempt to explain a business merger using chopsticks as visual aids. They'd moved to the living room afterward, settling into comfortable silence with books and tea, existing together in a way that felt less like cohabitation and more like home. Now, as darkness came, Vanessa found herself watching Min Jun over the edge of her novel. He'd abandoned his own book, his gaze distant, fingers drumming against his thigh. And that tell she'd learned meant he was working up the courage to say something difficult. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You. I'm always thinking about you." Vanessa set her book aside, giving him her full attention. "Min Jun, I need to tell you something." He shifted to face her fully, his posture formal despite the casual setting, a defense mechanism, she realized, for when he felt most vulnerable. "I've let you believe that my distance was purely about giving you space, about respecting your grief, and that was part of it, but it wasn't the whole truth." "Okay," she said carefully, her heart beginning to race. "I noticed you before the marriage was even arranged." The confession came out quiet but steady. "At a charity function 2 years before we wed. You were there with your parents, visiting Seoul. You were arguing passionately with someone about urban development and affordable housing, completely unaware that you'd attracted an audience. You were brilliant and fierce and so incredibly alive." Vanessa's lips parted in surprise. She remembered that trip, that conversation, but she had no memory of him. "When our families began discussing the arrangement, I said yes immediately. My mother thought it was duty. But I said yes because I'd been carrying the memory of you for 2 years, and suddenly I was being offered the impossible. A chance to be near you." His voice roughened. "Then I met you again at the engagement dinner, and you looked right through me. You were drowning in grief, and I realized you didn't remember me at all, that I was just another obligation in a life that had already asked too much of you. Min Jun, I loved you quietly," he continued, needing to say it all. "From a distance. I thought that's what love was, sacrifice, staying out of your way, giving you space to heal without the burden of my feelings. I thought loving you meant being invisible." He met her eyes. "I thought it was what you needed. I was wrong." Vanessa felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You loved me, even then?" "Even then. Especially then." He smiled sadly. "Every morning when I left coffee for you. Every time I asked Mrs. Cho about your favorite meals. Every evening I stood outside your door wanting to knock and talk to you about anything, everything. I loved you through all of it. I just thought I had no right to ask for anything." Back, she stood, crossing to where he sat, kneeling in front of him so they were eye to eye. "I need to tell you something too." He waited, his hands gripping the armrests like he was bracing for impact. "Somewhere during these 2 years, something shifted. I don't know exactly when. Maybe it was the coffee that appeared without asking, or the way you never made me feel like a burden even when I was barely functional. Maybe it was watching you be kind to Mrs. Cho when you thought no one was looking, or the way you spoke to your sister on the phone with such gentleness. She took a shaky breath. My grief didn't disappear, but it changed shape. And underneath it, I realized I was waiting for you, not out of obligation, not because I had to, but because somewhere along the way, you became the person I most wanted to see. You became the one I waited for. Min Jun's composure cracked, his hand lifted, hovering near her face like he was afraid to actually touch her. Vanessa. You don't have to stay far away anymore, she whispered. I'm not fragile. I'm not going to break. I'm here, and I'm choosing this, choosing you. May I? He didn't finish the question, but she understood. Permission. After 2 years of distance, he was asking permission to be close. She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. Min Jun's hand finally made contact, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her ache. His thumb traced her cheekbone, catching tears. Then he leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, until his forehead rested against hers. They breathed together, sharing air, sharing space, learning the proximity they'd denied themselves for so long. I've wanted to do this for 2 years, he murmured against her lips, then stopped waiting. The kiss, when it came, was soft at first, like he was memorizing the shape of her. Vanessa's hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself as 2 years of restraint began to dissolve. The kiss deepened naturally, his hands sliding into her hair while hers gripped his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, they were smiling. Real smiles, unguarded and full of joy and relief. I've been your husband in name for 2 years, Min Jun said, his voice rough with emotion. I'd like to be yours properly now, if you'll have me. Vanessa laughed through her tears. I've been waiting for you to stop standing so far away. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He pulled her up and onto the couch beside him, wrapping his arms around her like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. She settled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, rapid and real and alive. This isn't duty, he said into her hair. This is choice. You're my choice. And you're mine, she replied, tilting her face up to kiss him again. You always were. I just didn't know it yet. They stayed like that as the night deepened, tangled together on the couch, trading kisses and confessions, learning the language of love they'd been denied. There was no urgency, no fear. Just 2 people who had survived 2 years of silence, finally finding their way to each other. The arranged marriage that had begun as duty, that had been maintained through distance and misunderstanding and quiet, one-sided love, had transformed into something neither of them had dared hope for. They had chosen each other. Not because they had to, but because somewhere in the space between obligation and isolation, between grief and healing, between silence and honesty, love had taken root. And now, finally, they were letting it grow.